Those are the arabesque, part of the culture, again, the Iranian culture, and they're mainly used in water fountains as a part of the monuments and to glorify the actual monument. And the fish, the design of the fish, the tiny fishes on it, it's more straightforward, and there is a like a straightforward connection to the actual wildlife of creatures in the water.
Each of the artists felt a great connection to Las Vegas by doing this project.
Well, I took quite a liking to Kip immediately, and wanted so that's where the fish came from. And then, you know, thinking about those poor fish, and then what might be coming their way every time you throw something in the street.
Giuliano said several city departments got involved in the project, which had support from the city manager and the council, all the way down to public works crews. Giuliano said this project embodies the city's motto, building community to make life better.
To be able to reach out the community, and, you know, if you happen to be walking by and you see someone who's really not understanding that what they're doing is impacting the storm drain, whether they're sweeping leaves into the storm drain, you kind of explain to them, I understand they're just leaves or they're just debris from your yard, but you know what? They are being carried to the wash, and they're actually clogging the storm drain, and then when a flood comes, that's going to overflow. So their little small impact, you know, what do you do with it? You sweep it up and put it in the garbage rather than down the storm drain.
The city is hoping to do a similar project in 2019, this time getting school children to design art on the storm drain and hiring artists to make it happen. All of the artists said they'd love to work on the project again.
I love it. I do get to meet interesting people in the community. It does create an impact, a new conversation about our community, our environment. And it's very important, protecting our wildlife, Lake Mead. These are dear to my heart, and I know it's important to people who live here in Las Vegas. My inspiration, I try to paint from love, like through the heart, and it comes out beautifully. That's what I do, and that's what inspires me to create something, to create more beauty in the world.
Lake Mead is full of life, a seemingly endless aquatic parade, attracting and sustaining busy desert creatures. It's one of the most diverse ecosystems in Nevada, with species found nowhere else on Earth. But every time soap suds run down your driveway, oil drips in the streets, fertilizer washes off your lawn, or random trash gets swept in our storm sewers, their home gets a little uglier. They get a little sicker. If we don't take simple steps to change our ways, soon you'll wonder where all our friends have gone. It's time to clean up our act, Southern Nevada. To get your home or business lake-friendly certified, visit belakefriendly.com.
Some residents still don't know that anything you put down the storm drain can end up in Lake Mead. We have over 620 miles of channel in our flood control system that take water all the way down to the lake. Sometimes those channels are lined with concrete, other times we leave them natural. Residents often ask the district why some flood channels are made of concrete and some are natural. Throughout Clark County, there are examples of both, but as you'll see in this computer animation, the two are not equal. On the right, you'll see water rapidly filling up the simulated concrete channel. On the left, you'll notice that a natural channel does not fill up uniformly or as quickly. Rocks and shrubbery act to block the movement of water. They can also cause more noticeable waves. Concrete channels can move water up to 30 miles an hour. They're certainly dangerous places to be near during a flash flood, but they also process water more efficiently. In many cases, concrete channels make the most sense. But in areas with environmental sensitivity or areas near natural washes, we tried to leave the channels as natural looking as possible. We've also done a model to show you just how detention basins fill up with water during a flood event. In this animation, you can see the channel leading into the basin and the water beginning to fill. In some of our smaller basins, water can rise rapidly. Once again, this is no place to be during a flash flood. This model shows exactly why. Not only does the water rise rapidly, there's also a current and sometimes a wave visible through these basins. And just think of how much water that could be. Some of our basins are miles long. When it comes to the flood control system, there's no question too small. This year, we unveiled a new video for our school outreach program to provide answers to those young inquiring minds.
How many of you guys have ever heard it rain while you were in your classroom?
Each year, the district reaches more than 10,000 elementary school students with flash flood safety information. We recently worked with students at UNLV to update the video we show in schools. Feel like going back to school for a few minutes? Here's a look at our new presentation.
Yes, it is a desert out there. Sure, it hardly rains, but a few raindrops like me landing in our desert can quickly turn into a raging flood. Cars can float away, people can get hurt, plus homes and buildings can be destroyed. Our sky is usually sunny and clear. Rainstorms don't happen often in our dry climate. When rain does fall, though, it only takes less than 1 inch of rain to cause a flash flood. Here's why. We have a lot of hard crust in our soil called caliche. Some call it desert concrete. It forms just under the ground and it can't absorb water, so the water runs right off the ground into the streets or through washes, natural channels formed by running water. When rain falls on the west side of the Las Vegas Valley near Red Rock, it runs to the east side near Boulder Highway. It's a big downhill slope. To look at it another way, the Las Vegas Valley is like a giant bowl tipped on its side. The rainwater doesn't soak into the ground. Instead, it just slides right down the bowl from one side to the other. It's important to know how to stay safe when a flood occurs in the desert. To help you remember the dangers of floodwater, let's learn the 3 Ds of flash flood safety so you know how to stay safe from floods. The first D of flash flood safety you need to know is floodwater and flash floods are dangerous. Floodwater is fast and powerful. It can move extremely quickly and it can knock you off your feet. Floodwater will flow through the streets down into drainage pipes called storm drains and into flood channels. These are pathways that direct water away from your school, your neighborhood, and your home. The water travels inside these channels until they reach a detention basin. Think of these as really big bathtubs. These basins can be as big as 170 football fields in length and 55 feet deep. The detention basins take in huge amounts of flood water and release the water back into channels and underground storm drains at a much slower pace so it can travel safely through the valley into Lake Mead. Channels and detention basins are no place to play. They are dangerous. The water moves so fast it can sweep you under or you could drown. Don't ever go into flood channels and don't get in detention basins either. Remember, it's dangerous. Keep your friends, your family, and even your pets away from these areas at all times. Even without water in them, they are still very dangerous because water can rush in even if it's not raining where you are. The second D of flash flood safety is dirty. Floodwater is absolutely filthy. Floodwaters are filled with junk like oil, chemicals, and pet waste. It washes off yards down streets and into storm drains and detention basins. It's a dirty and dangerous place, one where you should never swim and play. The deep channels hide trash like nails, broken glass, and construction debris. It's so dirty that you can't see what may be under the water. Not only can this filthy water hurt you, but it can also harm our environment. Water from washing your car at home, sprinklers, and rainstorms flows to Lake Mead, where we get most of our drinking water. Pollutants like trash and chemicals in the water can hurt plants and wildlife like fish and birds. Everyone, including you, can help protect the land we live on, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. If you see someone littering or dumping trash in the desert or into storm drains, tell your parents. They can call the Regional Flood Control District at 702-685-0000. Remember, floodwater is dirty, but it is our job to pollute less. We all need to protect the environment, not only for today, but for future generations. The last D of flash flood safety you need to remember is don't drive. So, you know playing in floodwater is dangerous, but what about driving in it? You are not safe there either. You never want to drive through any amount of water. Just an inch of water can cause you to lose control of the car. All it takes is 2 feet of water for the car to float away, and you with it. The smart thing to do is always stay away from flooded areas. Floods are very powerful and can destroy anything in its path. Half of all deaths caused by flash floods are because people try to drive through flooded streets. This puts the drivers, the passengers, and the rescuers at risk. So remember to tell your parents, don't drive through floodwaters. It's just not safe and it's just not smart. Your parents can also get a ticket for driving through a flooded street. You need to make sure your parents don't put themselves, you, or the firemen trying to rescue you in danger. If a street is flooded, turn around, don't drown. When it rains, be alert. There are many signs that'll tell you rain may be coming. Lightning and thunderstorms in the valley can be beautiful, but make sure you're inside to enjoy them. Listen to radio or TV. You can learn if there's a flash flood watch or a flash flood warning. A flash flood watch means it's raining heavily and a flood could happen soon. Tell an adult if you know there's a flash flood watch and stay out of the rain. A flash flood warning means a flash flood is happening right now. Tell an adult and get to high ground right away. Storms in southern Nevada happen fast. The water will go away fast. Just stay inside and wait until the water is off the streets. You can also check out the Regional Flood Control website. There you'll find out how much rain is falling around the valley. If a lot of rain is falling, stay inside and away from the water. Flash flood season starts July through September, but floods in southern Nevada can happen anytime and anywhere. So remember, be prepared, be alert, and make smart decisions so that you can stay dry and stay alive.
Oh my God, this car's gonna hit us. Oh my God! Oh, we're floating! We're floating! We're floating! Oh my God!
Mind the road. Flash flood season is here.
We have all seen the devastation that floods can cause to homes and lives in Clark County. Has your neighborhood or home ever been affected by major storms? Federal flood insurance is a smart and cost-effective investment if you think your home is vulnerable. Some easy-to-understand assessments can help determine if you need flood insurance. Call your insurance agent or call 1-888-CALL-FLOOD or visit the Regional Flood Control District's website for guidance. See if flood insurance makes sense for you.
Yep. Look, it's floating.
Public outreach is an important part of the Flood Control District's mission, but when it comes to keeping floods away from people, our construction program has to reach all parts of the county. Let's take a look at this new project in Searchlight. Some of the district's projects are massive, like the $23.5 million Pittman North Detention Basin. Others are a lot smaller in scope, but are still priceless for residents in the outlying areas. Work is finishing up on a $2 million storm drain project under Encinita Street in Searchlight, Nevada. This project started a year ago and including installing 2,800 linear feet of reinforced concrete pipe. It was a big deal for this town an hour's drive south of Las Vegas. Randall Hastings lives on Encinitas in a home whose occupants have watched the flooding since the 1960s.
Since the street kind of slopes up right here, a lot of the water comes down right through this area here, and during the monsoon season it gets pretty heavy in the rainfall.
The county managed this project, and the Regional Flood Control District provided more than $2 million in funding for the new storm drain. Crews held frequent meetings during construction to make sure everyone was on task.
Yeah, and honestly, sometimes they can get a little scary. The water, like I said, during the monsoon season, it really rains hard here, and it comes quick, and it floods real fast. You know, and then being on this embank right here, it kind of just comes down real quick.
The project connected Encinitas Street to existing facilities at the south end of the city. Now, water will move underground and take away the big problem for residents.
It's kind of dangerous for the kids. Usually when it rains like that, we'll keep them inside. We don't let them go running around the park or nothing because, you know, I mean, it's not waist high or anything, but it's still dangerous. I mean, even if the water just knocks them down or, you know, it don't really have to be that deep to do that. So I think having that drain will help deal with the water situation.
The Searchlight project was built by Wadley Construction. The road is now paved and the pipes are underground, ready to carry water away from Hastings' home in a safe way. Here in the park, it's easy to remember why we have to keep our environment clean. So make sure you do your part and put litter where it belongs. For more information about the Flood Control District, go to BeFloodSafe.com or follow us on Twitter and Facebook.
There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
Coming up on our next edition of County Critters, Michael's Angel Paws is a group of dedicated dog lovers who bring their canines to the community. We'll tell you the story about Rocky the Burro, who was left for dead but now living the good life in Sandy Valley. And later on, we'll meet a pair of cute chows, Teddy and Chowder. Those stories and more coming up on the next edition of County Critters, right here on Clark County Television.
Clark County is a county located in the very southern tip of Nevada. It's about 8,000 square miles, population of about 2.2 million. The 400 square miles we cover here in the Las Vegas Valley, including the Las Vegas Strip, which is in Clark County, is our busiest part of that response area.
At any given time, we have upwards of 300,000 visitors from all across the world here in Las Vegas on the beautiful Las Vegas Strip.
The influx of visitors on a weekly, monthly basis is really a game changer for us in law enforcement. The way the city changes each weekend, each special event, that presents a whole new set of challenges.
Clark County, we try to hold ourselves up as an example. And instead of just doing business as usual, we as a team are really looking for, you know, some achievable solutions to some of these age-old questions.
As we were coming out of the recession, still stuck in some of our recession funding years, our call volume was very, very high. We had many of our vehicles at more than 5,000 calls a year, and that's just an unacceptable number.
We were sending these big, expensive rigs with 4 personnel to calls that were, in a lot of cases, not really warranting that robust a response.
So with staff, our medical director and our district attorney, we got together, we pulled several years of stats on medical calls, and we looked at what calls percentage-wise turned out to be actually critical calls. So we started to massage a new plan that came out to be called the X model, and we massaged it to where we were able to send the right resource to the right calls, and on those non-emergent calls, we stopped sending fire department assets to those calls, and we let the private ambulances handle that. We also looked at handling of intoxicated individuals on the Las Vegas Strip. That's a big number for us. So all those things combined, we knocked about 30,000 calls off of our units in a 1-year period.
If you get down to the root cause of some of these challenges, they're very solvable if you just do a little homework.
Las Vegas presents a lot of challenges, a lot of unique opportunities. We have to be in front of possible threats, and Las Vegas has the potential for all different types of threats that we have to be aware of. So partnerships is important to us. Being proactive is important to us, really in helping protect and serve the citizens of this community.
The relationship of the Clark County Fire Department with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, the other Valley Fire Departments, the other Valley Police Departments, and the FBI is amazing. We have trained together, we have built response programs and plans that are now used nationwide. Last year we suffered an unthinkable tragedy on October 1st of 2017 when we had the 58 people gunned down on the Las Vegas Strip attending an outdoor concert. Everything that we did for the years, like 6-7 years prior to that night, training, ICS command and control training, getting our guys and gals from both police and fire to match up and go to work together. On that night, we had 19 integrated police and fire rescue task forces in operation that night.
October 1st is a great example of collaboration. Our partnership with the city, with Chief Castle, was evident right away. We have to all be in sync, obviously, so communication in that was huge. We all partnered at the incident command structure for really kind of joint operations to figure out what the long-term response is, what the short-term response is.
It's one thing to say that you have great relationships, certainly one thing to say it when you have it at the top, but the reality of it is that you have to truly exercise that down to the level of the men and women that are doing the work on the police and the fire side. It takes bold leadership on both sides, the police and the fire department, to get us to where it is that we found ourselves on 1 October.
We are big proponents of task forces. The FBI puts together lots of task forces where different agencies come together to work particular threats. We have terrorism task forces, violent crime task forces. This is where we all sit together, work together on a side-by-side basis to really target whatever that particular threat is.
This is about getting better. And when you have really honest conversation between police and firefighters at the line level about things that could have gone better, it prepared us to do exactly what it is that we did on 1 October.
What we're really excited about is we have such a great young core of men and women in this organization, and they're going to carry this torch going forward of the pride, professionalism, and dedication that this department provides day in and day out to our residents, to our visitors, to our police officers and our law enforcement counterparts at the federal level. We've got a great group, a great plan going forward to keep at the level that we're at.
There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
Our community, our home, Clark County, Nevada. Thanks for watching Clark County Television.
It's sweater weather. Cover your pipes and plants to prevent freeze damage this winter. A Southern Nevada Water Authority water treatment facility earns accolades for going above and beyond to ensure your water quality. And get off your grass and earn some cash with a WaterSmart Landscapes rebate. Learn all the ways to save here on Waterways. The SNWA Board authorized General Manager John Ensminger to execute 3 agreements concerning a new federal drought contingency plan. The Lower Basin Plan provides Arizona, California, and Nevada with the tools to voluntarily reduce water demands and minimize risks associated with a decline in Lake Mead water levels. The Upper Basin Plan protects critical elevations in Lake Powell and ensures compliance with the 1922 Colorado River Compact. Under the proposed Lower Basin Plan, Nevada, Arizona, and California would make a series of voluntary water contributions to keep water in Lake Mead. The amount of voluntary contribution by each state is based on Lake Mead's elevation. The plan will allow the lower basin states to recover some of their voluntary contributions as Lake Mead's elevation recovers. Even with these voluntary contributions and mandatory shortage reductions, Southern Nevada has sufficient water resources to meet our community's water needs. However, continued conservation is critical to maintaining our current and future water resources. The Water Authority reached a milestone on the construction of its low lake level pumping station. In December, workers flooded the forebay, located more than 500 feet underground. It's now linked with intake number 3. Crews will soon install 32 submersible pumps in the forebay to pump water to SNWA's 2 water treatment facilities. The high-volume pumping station, combined with intake number 3, will ensure access to Southern Nevada's primary drinking water supply, even as lake levels decline. The low lake level pumping station is scheduled for completion in 2020. Everyone needs water. That's why it's so important to the Southern Nevada Water Authority to treat drinking water to the highest standards and deliver it safely to your homes. We're able to provide the highest quality water through our state-of-the-art and award-winning water treatment plants.
Our River Mountains facility truly is one of the best in the world. It goes far beyond standards for the Safe Drinking Water Act. We're very proud to be part of this facility.
The River Mountains Water Treatment Facility recently received the highly coveted Partnership for Safe Water's Excellence in Water Treatment Award from the American Water Works Association. Less than 20 water utilities have received the award, and when you consider there are more than 50,000 community water systems in the U.S., it's quite a recognition.
The partnership was conceived to recognize facilities going above the call of duty. It recognizes things like not being complacent in how we do business, but always trying to strive for something better. It looks at efficiency, and we've done well on all those categories: efficiency, maintenance, employee training. So we've gone above the call of duty and continue to press on. So it's a recognition of those efforts.
The rigorous award process measures the extent to which utilities optimize both water quality and efficiency of their facilities, as well as efforts to go above and beyond the regulations, ensuring continuous improvement to drinking water quality. With River Mountains, an expert panel analyzed hundreds of pages of technical data and detailed narratives describing the treatment plant's operations and capabilities. Kevin, what were some of the items the experts were looking for in distributing this award?
Well, they really examined our filter process, which is the heartbeat of a treatment plant. So they looked at our daily records, and they really drilled in to say how we were operating the plant, how we're doing backwashes on the filters and taking good care of them. They looked at our maintenance practices and were we taking good care of our facilities. They were looking at how we're training employees and making sure that they could work on that specific equipment at our plant. They also looked at our overall water quality and were we always pressing forward, trying to make it better, just not meeting the rules, but actually had well-defined goals that allowed us to push forward and actually improve water quality coming out of the plant.
The exclusive award is an honor for SNWA, which is responsible for providing a safe supply of drinking water to more than 2.2 million residents in Southern Nevada. The SNWA's 2 water treatment facilities, River Mountains and Alfred Merritt Smith, use cutting-edge technology to ensure that the community's water is treated and tested to the utmost standards. Ensuring high-quality drinking water requires the SNWA to coordinate with state and federal agencies and maintain compliance with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Safe Drinking Water Act. We monitor water quality in real time, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. At the SNWA's Water Quality Laboratory, an average of 400,000 water analyses are completed each year. Our lab is one of the most sophisticated in the world. It uses the latest technology to ensure that your water meets or surpasses federal standards. Beyond testing, water treatment processes are state-of-the-art. The Water Authority treats water with ozone, a powerful disinfectant that kills potentially harmful microscopic organisms that may be present. A multi-stage filtration process follows that. Then as water leaves the water treatment facilities, chlorine is again added to protect it on the way to your tap. Our research and development scientists find new ways to further improve the quality of our drinking water. The SNWA has one of the nation's top municipal R&D complexes and is one of the few that combines research and water quality testing under the same roof. The R&D conducted by SNWA has contributed to increased knowledge in the fields of water science and water treatment. Through R&D, SNWA has developed treatment techniques to address emerging water quality issues such as pharmaceuticals and personal care products.
Well, having all of our groups in one spot, they can support each other. If we have a treatment problem, our research group can come in and help. There's several PhDs that can help us solve technical problems. Also with our water quality group and our testing group, they can work with our operations group in making sure that the testing is accurate, timely, and very fast. We also have our maintenance group that installs instrumentation. It can be validated with our laboratory. What's really interesting is that our group really makes excellence a habit. Anybody can rise to the occasion for a few minutes of the day or a few days of the month, but really the partnership is pushing us to have excellence just all the time, and it's a way of measuring it. So we're really excited about this award.
Winter watering restrictions are in effect through February, limiting landscape watering to 1 day a week. If you're unsure what day you're assigned to water, visit snwa.com and click on Find Your Watering Group and Provider. Running your sprinkler system outside your assigned day is water waste and may result in a water waste fee or citation.
Whether it's residential, commercial, a city or county park, you could receive a violation or fee for watering outside your restricted day. Also, you could receive a violation or fee for spray and flow runoff, such as water flowing over a sidewalk or into a gutter from your property. You can also receive a citation or fee if you have an on-site leak, such as a broken emitter, broken sprinkler head, and those would be flagged and the customer would be notified of those irrigation issues.
In 2018, SNWA member agencies conducted approximately 8,000 water waste investigations throughout the valley and issued more than 400 fines. If you see water waste, report it immediately to your water provider and ensure you're adhering to mandatory watering restrictions to avoid a water waste fee. If you need help remembering to change your irrigation clock each season, sign up for our text reminders. It's certainly not the North Pole, but Las Vegas does experience its fair share of frigid temperatures, which means your landscape is vulnerable to cold snaps and freezes. Before you hunker down for winter, help your plants and irrigation take cover to ensure a healthy, vibrant landscape come spring.
Plants actually are very vulnerable. They're very much like people in the winter. They need that extra protection to keep them healthy. And then we also want to think about our irrigation system and be sure that we cover the irrigation system and keep that healthy in the winter too, so that we protect it from freezing.
Master gardener Denise McConnell has a knack for caring for desert plants. Her green thumb experience and tips can help your plants survive the extremes of the desert, from sweltering triple digits in the summer to the occasional freezes in winter. Like people, plants prefer layers to keep warm in the wintertime, so add more mulch to the plants in your landscape. Mulch is a top dressing that covers the soil and protects plant roots from freezing. It also helps to conserve moisture, so you don't have to water as often.
For those cold sensitive plants, you're going to want to add a layer of mulch as an extra protection. You're going to want to put about 6 inches of mulch around the base of the plant. Especially important on plants like this. Their hardiness depends upon where they actually come from. So the desert adapted plants will be the ones that will be hardy to this area. Other ones, subtropicals like bougainvillea, would have to take more protection. But the other ones can take it until it gets down into the low 30s, and then you may want to cover them. And you can use materials like burlap or a sheet and just cover them for the night and then take it off the next morning.
If you noticed frost or a freeze has damaged a plant, leave it alone until warmer weather arrives. New growth may still appear. Pruning or transplanting a damaged plant during winter months can hurt or even kill it. Now that you've prepared your plants to go a few rounds with Old Man Winter, you'll want to protect your irrigation system, the lifeline of your landscape.
So we want to protect all of our irrigation lines and be sure that we don't have those above the ground. We want to protect our hose bibs and the hoses themselves to keep them from breaking, and as well the backflow preventer. That's a quite expensive repair if you have to repair it if it should freeze. So we want to give that the adequate protection that it needs.
Walk through your landscape and inspect your irrigation lines. Bury any exposed drip lines or cover them with a few inches of mulch. This will help to insulate them against water that could freeze inside and burst the lines. Disconnect and drain garden hoses you don't regularly use in winter. Further protect the faucet with a cover or wrap it with an old cloth and duct tape. Next, cover your backflow prevention device.
Denise, why is wrapping or protecting the backflow so important?
So the backflow preventer actually can freeze. And if that freezes and breaks, it's a very expensive repair. And this backflow preventer is what keeps the irrigation water from going back into the water supply. So it's very important to give it that winter protection. And there's a number of ways that we can protect it. Probably one of the easiest is to just purchase this sleeve that goes right over the top of it. There's also like a synthetic rock that you put over the top of this. That's a good protection. And then the other thing is that you can use this foam tubing. And this one here is especially made for this. It has tape on the inside here so that when you put it around there, you pull the tape off and it can close. And this is a great insulator. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually wrap it. So I like to cut a little piece off first, just for this little area here where they come together, just to hold them together when I'm working with it. And then you just start wrapping this tape around it. And this holds that foam in place and just makes it a little more firm. And it goes pretty quickly once you get the hang of it. I'm only going to wrap right up to these valves here. And you can see these valves here. These need to be kept out of the wrapping, because if you have to turn the water off to the irrigation, this is where you would do it. There's also a bleed valve here on the bottom, and you don't want that wrapped either. So you don't put the foam wrapping over it, and you don't put the tape over it. But here I have the foam wrapping that goes right up to the big bell part here, and it's important that that is wrapped with the foam all the way up to the big bell. And that's all there is to it.
Finally, locate your water shutoff valve and learn to turn off water at the source. Doing this will save you from major damage caused by leaks or burst lines. For more winter protection tips, visit us at snwa.com.
Late winter is the ideal time to prune your plants and trees. Master Gardener Denise McConnell has tips to help you prune like a pro.
Here we are in the backyard. We've just done this pruning. So this is the time of the year to actually prune your deciduous trees. So those would be, meaning non-evergreen. The sap is not running in the tree at that time. So when we do the pruning, you know, it's right where this swelling is here. See how the bark swells out here? And you do it right up at the edge of that swelling before it narrows any further. And the reason why we make that cut there is so that the bark will keep forming there and eventually will completely close. So here's one here that's about 3 years old. And you can see that that cut, which was that big, has formed a lot of bark around it. And that cut will eventually completely close, and you won't even know that that cut was there. We're going to prune this climbing rose. It'll eventually, you know, get up on the trellis. And so this is the time of the year to do it, no later than Valentine's Day. So what you want to do is you want to look for a place where it's actually going to create a bud that's going to come out and grow up this direction. So I have a place here, it's called a bud scar, and that's where I'm going to prune it. I've sterilized my pruning tool with half bleach and half water, and you want to sterilize it whenever you're cutting roses, moving from one rose bush to the other so that you don't carry disease with you in case something may be infected. You're going to cut about 1/4 of an inch above that bud scar at a 45-degree angle. So I'm just going to take that off just like that, and then I'm going to come back here and take some of these leaves off, and there's little bud scars here where the plant's going to grow in that direction. I don't want it growing out this direction because I've got a pathway here. So now what I do is I take some carpenter's glue. And what I'm going to be doing is actually putting that on the edge where my pruning cut is. And what that's going to do is seal that pruning cut off so that I don't have insects getting down inside of it. So the roses is the only thing that we do this with. So this is lantana, and lantana is very popular in our landscape and does great here. And you can leave it there and have it look like that, but if you want to clean it up and make it be nice, it's okay to do that too. You're not going to hurt the plant at all. So I simply just take a big section of it and go down. This is the ground cover lantana, and I just cut this about 1 inch above the ground. And it goes pretty quickly because you just, you gather up these big sections. And sometimes people think their lantana is dead and then they'll pull them out, but you don't want to do that. Like with the bougainvillea, you just wait till spring and see where the new growth is coming out and cut back to that. So we made really short work of that, and look at how nice that looks now.
It may be sweater weather, but it's not too early to plan for a water-smart landscape. In fact, now's the perfect time to enroll in the SNWA's Water Smart Landscapes rebate program. By spring, you'll have a yard that not only conserves water in a big way, but looks uniquely your own.
We come out and we literally look at our yard and we enjoy it tremendously.
Yeah, it's actually, we can't believe it's our yard.
Yep. From the kitchen window, when I look outside, it's beautiful. From every angle, it looks clean, it looks organized.
And when you look at
awesome.
what grass we have left, this is only a third. Like, we took out 2/3 of our grass.
Adrian Ridgely and Mike Graves were finally ready to ditch their grass when the SNWA increased its Water Smart Landscapes rebate from $2 a square foot to $3 a square foot. Their backyard lawn was using too much water and didn't represent the couple's artistic lifestyle.
Adrian and Mike, tell me a little bit about what made you decide to convert a portion of your yard to desert landscaping.
So I guess the first reason was that a lot of our grass actually didn't look good. There were patches of it that were just like crabgrass, and it never thrived. And so that was one of the main reasons. The other one would be definitely to cut down on the water.
Sure. And when you started the process, did you have some goals in mind of what you wanted to achieve with the conversion?
I wanted to keep as green as possible, obviously. And we eliminated one tree. Some of them kind of popped on its own, volunteers what we call them. So I wanted to have more modern look, clean, less maintenance for sure, and obviously water preservation.
The couple designed the concept for their backyard conversion and hired a landscaper to remove more than 1,500 square feet of grass. They planted a variety of colorful, desert-hardy plants like lantana, Texas Ranger, privet, and juniper. Low water use drip emitters replaced water-intensive sprinkler heads, and decorative rock mulch surrounds their small patch of grass kept for their dog, Princess. Adrian and Mike added the final touches, landscape lighting, and pieces of art to complete their home's outdoor retreat. The SNWA's Water Smart Landscapes rebate program walked them through the entire process.
After the application process, they came out and measured, and that was pretty simple. The guy wasn't here maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and he made a little map. Then we just did our thing. And then at the end, you call them again, they came out and remeasured, and then you get a nice letter a couple weeks later, tells you what you qualify for, and you sign some paperwork and you get the check. Like I was shocked at how fast and easy the process was. Like, it was painless.
To incentivize residents and businesses to reduce grass in the valley, the SNWA increased the Water Smart Landscapes rebate. Participants can now earn up to $3 for every square foot of turf they convert to Water Smart Landscaping, up to 10,000 square feet per project, and $1.50 for every square foot over that. The maximum incentive for any property in a fiscal year is $500,000.
Johan, tell us, how has the increased rebate helped incentivize Southern Nevadans to step up and participate in the rebate program?
Since the rebate increased back in May from $2 a square foot to $3 a square foot, we've seen a tremendous increase in the number of new applications coming into the program, and it's been very encouraging for us. We know that we still have a lot of work left to do. There's still a lot of turf out left in the community.
As the record drought continues to impact Lake Mead water levels, our community is asked to elevate its conservation efforts.
To boost participation and remind Valley residents and businesses about conservation efforts, the SNWA is increasing its community outreach. Our conservation team recently mailed 20,000 letters to properties with large patches of grass to encourage them to participate in the landscape rebate. The team also is reaching out to people who had previously signed up for the landscape rebate but never completed their projects, and homeowners associations where large sections of non-functional grass area exists.
The SNWA has been doing a lot of outreach with single-family residential, with homeowners associations, with property managers, and with businesses. We know that there is about 5,000 acres of non-functional turf left throughout the valley, and this is turf areas around shopping centers, gas stations. This is turf along roadways and medians. We know that that turf is perfect for the Water Smart Landscapes program. So we try to emphasize that if the only time that someone walks on the turf area is to mow it, that's perfect to be converted to desert landscape.
Replacing water-guzzling grass with a Water Smart landscape could cut your home water use by up to 75%. The SNWA estimates a water-efficient landscape can save homeowners approximately 55 gallons of water per square foot per year. Those savings add up. For an average 1,000 square foot conversion, that's 55,000 gallons of water saved yearly. For Adrian and Mike, the savings is more than 82,000 gallons. Since the inception of the Water Smart Landscapes rebate program, Southern Nevadans have replaced more than 187 million square feet of turf, enough to wrap an 18-inch roll of sod around 95% of the Earth's circumference. The water savings is beyond 119 billion gallons.
Don't wait long to convert your grass to a Water Smart landscape. Apply online at snwa.com and you'll do your part to help Southern Nevada conserve water where it matters most, outdoors.
Before you remove a single blade of grass, you must apply for the Water Smart Landscapes rebate. Enroll online or call the Conservation Helpline for a printed application. Once the completed application is received, the SNWA will schedule a site review visit to evaluate your lawn and conversion areas and answer any questions you may have. You must participate in the pre-conversion site visit before removing your lawn. Then, dig in. You have 1 year to complete your conversion. Finally, cash in and get your rebate check. For more program details, visit us at snwa.com.
This isn't a field, this is useless. Now we can really play.
The Las Vegas Wash is a true success story. Once a natural resource for Native Americans and early settlers, it suffered from erosion and population growth in the late 20th century. In the last 20 years, a community effort to stabilize the wash has paid off.
Community involvement has been a main part of the Las Vegas Wash, the improvements that we've been doing along the Las Vegas Wash.
Today, the Las Vegas Wash is a thriving waterway thanks to partnerships, volunteers, and dedicated work to restore this important resource. Just 20 years ago, the wash was in despair. Erosion, garbage, and poor water quality crippled the 12-mile channel that serves as the final link in our water supply. The Las Vegas Wash is the primary drainage channel for the entire Las Vegas Valley. Each day, the wash captures approximately 200 million gallons of highly treated effluent, urban runoff, and shallow groundwater, as well as runoff from occasional storms. It acts as a natural filter as it channels the water to Lake Mead, Southern Nevada's primary source of drinking water. Wetlands help filter sediment and other impurities from its flows. In the late 20th century, flows within the channel increased significantly, along with Southern Nevada's population, causing erosion that drained wetlands and threatened wildlife habitat, water quality, and wastewater infrastructure.
One major issue was an algal bloom in Las Vegas Bay in Lake Mead, which was caused by high nutrient levels which were going through the Las Vegas wash, as well as sediment from the Las Vegas wash was entering Lake Mead, really causing water quality problems in the lake. And then third, some of our water supply pipelines were being exposed due to the erosion in the Las Vegas wash.
In 1998, community stakeholders, including the SNWA, partnered to address water quality issues in the wash and find a way to stabilize this important water resource. The Las Vegas Wash Coordination Committee was formed. The committee mapped out a plan to address tough issues plaguing the wash. Over the past 20 years, the group has worked tirelessly to restore this vital ecological resource. Among its many accomplishments, the Las Vegas Wash Coordination Committee has reestablished the wetlands, increased wildlife habitats, revegetated areas along the wash to stabilize soils, and improved water quality by constructing weirs, dam-like structures that slow the flow of water and control erosion along the bed of the wash.
In 2018, we completed the final weir along the Las Vegas wash, so now there are 21 weirs which slow down the water, reduce erosion, and help improve water quality. With that, we've revegetated over 500 acres along the Las Vegas wash, which definitely improve the ecosystem, providing a home for different types of wildlife. And those revegetated acres also help improve the water quality.
Public outreach and community involvement are key components of the Las Vegas Wash's success. The Las Vegas Wash Coordination Committee organizes green-up planting events twice a year. Volunteers arm themselves with shovels, dig in, and help plant hundreds of native plants along the wash.
This is our 33rd green up along the Las Vegas wash, and having that community involvement has been critical to the success of this program. It allows ownership from the community and the stewardship activities that they can do by planting plants and seeing those plants grow and coming back year after year. We know that it is creating a bond between this project and the community members.
There are more ways to save, so join us next time here on Waterways. If you'd like to share your conservation efforts at home, contact us at Waterways, 1001 South Valley View Boulevard, Las Vegas, Nevada, 89153. Or send us an email through our website at snwa.com. We may feature your story. For more how-to videos and tips to conserve and care for our water, connect with us on social media. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time, right here on Waterways.
After October 1st, people started saying, Vegas strong.
But the truth is, I don't always feel strong.
Some days I feel scared.
Alone.
Exhausted.
Overwhelmed.
Hopeless.
Anxious.
But I didn't think I needed help.
Because I thought things would get better.
We didn't have physical wounds.
But what happened that night affected all of us.
And it's never too late to get the help you need.
Reach out to the Vegas Strong Resiliency Center to see how they can help you.
Thanks for watching Clark County Television.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Bill Brown with Brookings Mountain West. On behalf of my colleagues, welcome. And as always, our thanks to both Greenspun College and the staff here who help us record our events. So if you're watching us on YouTube or on public television, I hope you're enjoying this, whether it's 3 in the morning or not. We're going to talk energy and geopolitics tonight, a timely topic given what's been going on at the UN and a few other places. I haven't heard any news in the last 5.5 minutes, so you'll have to update me if you have. But of course, energy is a topic of great interest to us here in Nevada. We have 2 upcoming ballot questions in November, as I'm sure you're aware. Of course, our state's invested in both solar and geothermal in terms of alternative energies, and we have our long-standing issues with nuclear energy and fuel as well. So I'm really looking forward to Samantha's talk tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about our speaker. Samantha Gross is a fellow in the Cross Brookings Initiative on Energy and Climate. Her work is focused on the intersection of energy, the environment, and policy, including climate policy, international cooperation, energy efficiency, unconventional oil and gas development, and energy and water as well. She's had an interested and varied career, with more than 20 years of experience in energy and environmental affairs. She was director of the Office of International Climate and Clean Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. She's also worked at the Government Accountability Office on Natural Resources and Environment, and is an engineer directing environmental assessment and remediation projects. Samantha's educational background prepared her for that. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from Illinois, a Master's of Science in Environmental Engineering from Stanford, and a Master's in Business Administration from UC Berkeley. So she's more than well qualified to speak on this topic tonight. So please join me in welcoming Samantha Gross.
Oh, those lights are bright. They warned me about those before I walked up here. So I want to thank Bill for his kind introduction, and I want to thank all of you for coming out here this evening. So I want to spend my time up here talking about oil and gas in particular, and the changes that we're seeing today in oil and gas and how they're playing out in global politics and in economics. So tonight we'll go on a tour of the changing energy world. We'll start right here in the United States. Oh, that's better. Should I go back for the film, actually? We're good. Okay, sorry about that. So we'll go on a tour of the changing energy world, starting right here in the United States, where growing oil and gas production is changing energy markets. From there, we'll move on to how this new supply changes the story in energy-consuming countries in Europe and in Asia. And we'll finish our world tour in the Middle East, where growing oil and gas supply from other sources, combined with a coming peak in demand, are forcing a rethink in these oil-dominated economies. You have almost certainly heard about the oil and gas boom here in the United States. President Trump has talked about energy dominance and about oil and gas as a driver for economic growth and for exports. I have some real reservations with the term dominance, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But there's no question that these events have changed the world of oil and gas. Before the early 2000s, oil and gas production in the U.S. had been declining for years. U.S. oil production peaked during the 1970s, and this decline was expected to continue. Oil imports were expected to keep on growing, and companies planned to build import terminals for liquefied natural gas, or LNG, getting prepared for the day when our own natural gas production couldn't meet demand. But then an important change happened, thanks to some optimistic engineers who combined existing technologies in new ways. They combined horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing to produce oil and gas from formations that geologists had known about for years, but the engineers had never quite figured out how to produce oil and gas from them economically. As they figured out how to make these new technologies work, oil and gas production in the United States took off, beginning in around 2005 for natural gas and around 2010 for oil. The change in oil production was particularly extreme. It increased by 2/3 from 2011 to 2015. The story of natural gas was slightly less dramatic, but still impressive. Production increased nearly 40% between 2007 and 2017. The United States reached an incredible benchmark last month when we passed Russia to become the world's largest oil producer. U.S. oil demand is still so large that we're a significant net oil importer still, but we're importing a lot less than we did in years past. And we even export oil today, generally exporting crude oil that doesn't fit our refinery system very well, and importing oil that does. 10 years ago, okay, let's try that again. 10 years ago, the idea of the U.S. as an oil exporting nation was just completely absurd. In fact, it was even illegal. Congress lifted a ban on U.S. oil exports at the end of 2015. We've also become an exporter of natural gas. We produce more than we need, and we export natural gas through pipelines, particularly Mexico, and in liquefied form to Latin America, to Europe, and to Asia. This new method of extracting oil and gas has completely changed the U.S. industry, and it won't just stay here. Oil and gas resources that can be produced this way exist in many parts of the world. The revolution is not winding down. It's actually gearing up, and it's now moving to places like China and Argentina. This unexpected and growing oil and gas supply has changed the way that policymakers around the world think about these resources. So during my first go-around in the U.S. government, beginning in 2002, peak oil meant peak supply. There was great concern at that time that the world was running out of oil, or at least running out of inexpensive oil. Engineers like myself were always somewhat skeptical of this argument. We're an optimistic bunch, and we generally believe that new technology will deliver new breakthroughs. But the view that oil supply was reaching a peak was very prevalent in the early 2000s and mid-2000s. At that time, I led several discussions about U.S. energy security that got completely hijacked by the idea of peak oil. We weren't even able to get to the kinds of things that we really wanted to talk about, because those who believed in peak oil completely dominated the conversation. What a difference a few years can make. The fundamental shift I'm talking about tonight is really a change from an attitude of energy scarcity to one of energy abundance. There's now general recognition that the oil age won't end because we run out of oil. And this has important global consequences. Climate activists are now focused on the idea of stranded fossil fuel assets or of unburnable carbon. And this view is just diametrically opposed to the ideas of peak fossil oil that we talked about just a few years ago. In fact, today's focus is on peak oil demand, not peak oil supply. It's become sort of a game among energy economists to try to guess when oil demand will peak. You see estimates from as soon as the mid-2020s to those that go out past 2040. But because of climate change concerns, new technologies, and ever greater energy efficiency, oil demand will level off and eventually decline in the future. The exact date when this might happen is really less important than the overall trend. So I've established the general idea of greater abundance in energy markets that started out here in the US. Now I want to turn to how that plays out in some other regions of the world. And let's start by talking about natural gas in Europe. The countries of the European Union import about 70% of their natural gas, and Russia is their most important supplier. Bringing in natural gas from Russia makes both economic and geographic sense. There's significant pipeline capacity to move natural gas from Russia into Europe, and this gas is quite inexpensive. Natural gas is becoming more important in Europe's overall energy supply, particularly because it makes a good and flexible partner for intermittent sources of renewable power, like wind and solar. And Europe's own natural gas resources in the North Sea and in the Netherlands are declining. So Russian gas may be cheap and it may be local, but it may not be reliable. Russians have used their natural gas supplies as a political weapon in the past. Important pipelines to Europe go through Ukraine, where Russia has been a malevolent influence for years. Russia has twice shut down supply through Ukrainian pipelines during disputes with Ukraine, also shutting down supply to the EU as well. In 2014, the EU imposed sanctions on Russia after it annexed Crimea, a region of Ukraine, further clouding this situation. And some will argue that the Russians need the income from exporting gas to the EU just as much as the Russians need Russia, just as much as the Europeans need Russian gas. And so they'll argue that the Russians are not really inclined to play games with gas supply. But nonetheless, many in Europe see Russia as an unreliable supplier, and a supplier not afraid to use its energy resources for political ends. Well, how does growing U.S. natural gas production help out with this European problem? Well, it helps to give the Europeans more options. For starters, the U.S. could send gas to Europe directly, delivered via LNG, via ships. This is definitely more expensive than pipeline gas that comes in from Russia, but it's an option. But really the most important impact isn't sending U.S. gas to Europe directly, but the fact that growing U.S. production has freed up other sources of natural gas from around the world. So back when the U.S. was expected to become a significant natural gas importer, the global LNG industry geared up to supply us. Import terminals were planned around the coasts of the United States, and companies abroad invested in LNG, expecting to supply the U.S. market, particularly in Qatar and in Africa. But U.S. natural gas production made these natural gas imports totally unnecessary. So who benefited? All the countries around the world that import natural gas. The LNG market has become more competitive and more transparent, with contracts that are less restrictive, having fewer contracts that require minimum purchase volumes, or fewer contracts that restrict your ability to resell gas if you don't need it at that time. And these less expensive and more flexible LNG contracts give Europe a viable option to Russian pipeline gas. And that gives them more negotiations, more leverage in their negotiations with Russia. And it may actually improve Russian behavior, sort of understanding what they can and can't get away with, because there are other options. In general, more options and more competition create better outcomes for buyers. So, speaking of important buyers, let's travel to Asia next. Asia has been the driver of global oil demand in recent years, especially in China, as its economy has boomed and it's grown into the world's manufacturing center. Understanding that China definitely needs oil to fuel its development, China's government-owned oil companies invested all over the world to find oil to meet China's needs and also to diversify China's supply base. By 2015, Chinese government oil companies had invested in oil and gas projects in 54 countries all over the world. But the growing environment of abundance in the global oil market has made it more of a buyer's market rather than the seller's market that it was when we were concerned about peak oil supply and oil scarcity. And we really saw this play out in the past few years when oil prices dropped. From late 2014 to late 2016, crude oil prices went from about $110 a barrel down to less than $30 a barrel. And suddenly, the OPEC producers and Russia were making nice with the Chinese, rather than the other way around. Saudi Arabia's king did a month-long tour of Asia early last year, where he signed $65 billion worth of business deals in China, including deals to build oil-related projects like refineries and petrochemical plants in China. An important goal of these travels and these business deals was to cement Saudi Arabia's position as China's key supplier of oil. Russia, too, is relying on China to buy its oil and gas, especially as buyers in Europe have their doubts and have other options. Russia has made significant deals with China for it to buy more oil. And Russia is also building a nearly 2,000-mile pipeline from Siberia to the Chinese border that will be completed at the end of next year. The Russians are also seeking Chinese financing for energy projects as a way of getting around US and EU sanctions on the Russian energy industry. Russia needs China in a way that it has not in the past. In fact, that need ran the other direction not very long ago. Abundant LNG, or liquefied natural gas, has been very good for Asia as well. Japan, China, and South Korea are the world's largest consumers of LNG, and they are enjoying better prices and more flexible terms for their imported natural gas. So all in all, countries in Asia that rely on oil and gas imports to fuel their growth are more in the driver's seat than they have been in the past. And large oil producers like Saudi Arabia and Russia are coming to them to make sure that they can be their suppliers of choice. And this is an important change and a complete flip from not very long ago. So as the last stop on our world tour, let's pay a visit to the Middle East. The consequences of the new energy abundance that I've been talking about have been overwhelmingly positive in the United States, in Europe, and in Asia, because these countries are by and large energy importers, and also because they have very large, very diverse economies. But the oil and gas producing countries of the Persian Gulf region are different. The economies of the Gulf region are focused on oil and gas. In fact, their economies are really set up to distribute oil and gas wealth to their citizens. I know Saudi Arabia the best. I worked there for about 1.5 years, and it's also the country with the largest economy and also the largest oil production in the region. So I'll use Saudi Arabia as my example of how economies in that region work and how they need to change in this new global environment. So the government is absolutely central to the economy in Saudi Arabia and also to citizens' lives. The government owns the one oil company in Saudi, Saudi Aramco, and 90% of government revenues come from oil and gas production. The government is also the primary employer. 70% of employed Saudis work for the Saudi government. And the government also owns or it's involved in a lot of industries in a way that's not the case here in the US. Just as an example, when I was there, I worked for an energy research institute. But when people here and friends here asked me, do you work for the government? Is what you do government related? That was actually a really hard question to answer. Officially and directly, no, I didn't work for the Saudi government. But the institute I worked for was founded and its endowment was set up by the previous Saudi king, King Abdullah. And the Minister of Energy had an office in our building and a very fancy house on our compound. So was that a government job or not? There's not the division there that there is here. You can't pull things apart that way. Everything that happens in Saudi Arabia is connected to the government. But this situation can't go on forever. The Saudi population is growing, and it's very young. More than 2/3 of the population there is under 30. About 250,000 young Saudis enter the market every year. And finding jobs for them in this government-dominated system is becoming a challenge. At the same time, the 2-year plunge in oil prices that I talked about a minute ago, and the idea that peak demand is coming eventually, it's really demonstrating that they need to diversify their economy. The government can no longer count on oil revenues to do everything, to support the entire economy and to employ this growing young population. But it's really hard to completely change the nature of your economy, from one that's designed with distribution in mind, to take oil revenues and distribute them to your citizens, to an economy that encourages innovation and diversified economic growth. These countries realize that this is a challenge, and they're trying to change. For instance, Saudi Arabia has a Vision 2030 plan that encourages the development of high-tech industries and finance industries, along with providing a slightly more liberal environment in an attempt to attract business and to keep its brightest citizens within the kingdom and spending money within the kingdom. Recent news you've heard about the Saudis allowing women to drive, or for the first time in years allowing movie theaters or music concerts, is part of this change. The Gulf countries have also agreed to implement a value-added tax to generate more revenues. And they're also increasing prices for gasoline, electricity, and water. But these reforms are happening slowly, and they're very unpopular. You see a couple steps forward and then one back. You think we get angry here when our gasoline prices go up? The Saudis genuinely see cheap gasoline as their birthright. And when prices went up from very low levels to slightly high levels, it was ugly. But beyond investing in a few industries and providing some basic social and tax reform, Saudi Arabia and the other countries in the region really need to change the fundamental relationships that their governments have with their citizens. Cushy, secure government jobs are the goal of the majority of young people, and that's how they've seen their fathers and their fathers' fathers work. But these citizens need to see rewards in more dynamic and yet more risky careers in private sector. The education system there needs to focus on the needs of private sector employers. A common complaint is that graduates of local high schools and universities don't have the skills that these employers are looking for. As the government has required more locals to work in different industries, there's been a real backlash. In fact, there's even been times when they've paid local residents to stay home. And I don't say this to insult the Saudis or anything else. It's just you need an education system that builds these people up to be able to take these kinds of positions. And the government needs to provide more room for the private sector to thrive, rather than crowding out private investment with its own spending or scaring off private investment with its policies. Saudi Arabia a few months ago rounded up a number of business leaders and even people in the royal family and put them in the world's fanciest prison, made from the Riyadh Ritz-Carlton. And they demanded money that they said that these business people and members of the royal family had gained in corrupt ways. But from the outside, this looked just like a shakedown. And whether or not there was any due process involved was unclear from where we all sit. Unsurprisingly, outside investment in Saudi Arabia has been down since then, which is the exact opposite of what they need to diversify their economy. So none of these necessary changes can happen quickly. And the necessary change in the relationship between the governments and their citizens may challenge the stability of these governments in the region. You have to think about the trade-offs that the citizens of these countries have made. They have an autocratic government. They don't have say in the way they're governed. But on the other hand, they have benefits and a comfortable lifestyle. But what will happen when these governments can no longer hold up their end of the bargain? Only time will tell, but this is certainly a challenging time for these countries. And I'm somewhat grateful that I'm not in Saudi right now. But I'll wrap up the global energy tour by bringing up a couple of global issues. First, I want to talk about the impact of the new oil and gas abundance on climate change. When I was here around this time last year, I focused on climate and on the impacts of us pulling out of the Paris Accord. And when we thought the world was running out of oil and gas, a potential bright side to all that was its ability to make fundamental changes in the energy system easier. If prices for oil and gas are ever rising and oil and gas are becoming more scarce, That makes alternative forms of energy more attractive and certainly more necessary. To be clear, the amount of oil and gas in the world is definitely finite. I mean, we all understand that. But where we are now is that the amount of oil and gas in the world will not be the limiting factor on how much we use. A former Saudi energy minister put it well. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, and the oil age won't end because we run out of oil. What we need the political will to change our energy system. We need technology to make low-carbon energy affordable and convenient. And we need visionary entrepreneurs to bring these new technologies to the market and to the masses. Running out of fossil fuels is not a solution to the climate challenge, and it won't save us. We need to think more concretely about real solutions. The new abundance also brings out some really important geopolitical challenges. I've been talking all evening about the balance of power shifting away from some historically important producers, like Russia and the Persian Gulf states. These producers aren't losing their market, and they're not going to go away anytime soon. They're just facing more competition, and they're operating in a market that may level off and become smaller over time. But this shift is far from complete. It's a long-term trend rather than a sharp change. When I talk about oil peaking, I think about oil sort of reaching a plateau and then perhaps declining over time. We're not looking at a sharp turnaround. But despite all this abundance that I've been talking about and the idea of peak oil demand, oil prices today are at their highest level since 2014. And President Trump addressed the United Nations General Assembly yesterday morning. And he tried to really take OPEC to the woodshed. He said that they're ripping off the rest of the world and that we will not put up with these horrible prices. And I can't get inside of his head. Shocking, I know. I don't know if the president is trying to convince the U.S. public that he's doing something about high oil prices and high gasoline prices that voters see at the pump, or whether he thinks he can shame OPEC into producing more oil, which there's not a lot of wiggle room right there. They're producing almost as much as they can right now. But the president is an important cause of today's higher oil prices. When he walked away from the Iran nuclear deal and he put sanctions on Iranian oil production, he removed an important source of oil supply from the global market, and unsurprisingly, prices are responding. And these sorts of events will continue to happen. Political challenges and technical disruptions will remove oil and gas from the market and increase prices at times. But I'm sticking to my guns on the overall long-term trend of abundance. If I could predict geopolitical events and short-term oil prices, I would be on a very nice beach with a very cold drink right now. I don't have that ability, but what I can talk about is where I think the longer term is going. And I think the longer term trend is going toward there being ample oil and gas supply and demand for that supply actually peaking at some point. And players in the global energy market are demonstrating their belief in this new future I'm describing with their actions, with the way that, particularly the way that the suppliers are acting towards their customers. I think that really demonstrates that this is a reality and there's truth to the things that I'm saying, despite the fact that oil prices are high as I stand here. So as a final point before I wrap up and we start a conversation, the U.S. has become a really important producer of oil and gas, not just a consumer. But the industry here is made up of dozens of businesses, small and large, and they make decisions based on their own conditions, their own desire for profit, and their own funding levels and appetite for risk. And this is really different than what you see in many of the oil producers around the world, the Russians or the Saudis. Their oil companies are largely state-owned, and they make decisions based on some different criteria, not just profit margins, but long-term economic management and political goals. And this is why I'm really frustrated by this rhetoric about energy dominance. The U.S. isn't dominating anybody with our energy supply. We're not set up to use our energy supply for political purposes. It's not what we do, by and large. I feel like that saying is mostly just a saying, and it's intended to play well with certain kinds of audiences, but we're not set up to play politics with our energy. But I really do believe that having more non-political oil and gas supply on the market is a good thing. It's a good thing for a lot of different countries and a lot of different places. I really prefer to see economics be the primary driver in global energy markets, although politics will always play some role, particularly because there are important producers for whom politics will always play a role. And economics will be crucial to minimizing climate change, too. We can't count on oil and gas scarcity to do the job for us. So I want to thank you all for your kind attention, and I look forward to your questions. I've gone a little short on my time, but part of that is because this conversation could go in a million different directions. I've tried to keep the story somewhat linear, so it's mostly followable, but we can follow whatever thread you guys are most interested in talking about, be that on the supply side or the demand side, or what's happening here in the United States. So do we have mics for questions, or should people just shout?
Yeah, people will know to speak up in our lectures here.
That sounds good. Well, yeah, tell me what you all are most interested in, and we can follow whatever thread grabs you. Yeah, there's several questions. Let's start here and go across.
Regarding supply, you haven't mentioned Africa or anything in South America beyond Argentina. And as I understand it, there are vast shale opportunities in those areas, plus in Russia itself and in China. So when you speak of finite, I agree, and obviously it is, but it seems to me that the finite is a long way away.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying, and I completely agree that there are resources, tight oil resources, shale gas resources in a lot of different places in the world. And when we speak of finite, the world is a finite system, but oil and gas are not really finite in an economic sense. There's sort of a difference between an absolute finite level and the level that we can actually produce. We'll run into problems with climate change way before we run out of oil and gas. So in any sort of reasonable sense, oil and gas resources really aren't finite for us. As I talk about, I kind of focused on certain areas for oil and gas production. There's a lot of new areas coming online that I didn't do a full world tour. Brazil is coming back. Guyana has significant new oil and gas resources that are being produced. Argentina's coming back. Places in Africa are coming back. The world is not low on oil and gas. Long story short.
You looked at falling oil prices or fossil fuel prices. Won't that inhibit progress on alternative energy?
Well, I think that's where I talk about you need the economics to work out on that. We can't count on oil and gas, on rising oil and gas prices to get us there. We need to think about working on technologies that will make oil and gas the less attractive option. An important way to think about this, let me add one thing before I come back. An important way to get there would be pricing the externalities of oil and gas. If we actually had, let's say, a carbon tax, one of my favorite policies, that reflected the damage caused by CO2 emissions to the climate, then all of a sudden the economics look different. And then you can actually have oil and gas compete on a level playing field with other forms of energy. There were some. Okay.
I enjoyed your talk. Could you speak a little bit about maybe the future of nuclear power?
Yeah, I'm happy to. The future of nuclear power is tricky, and it really depends on where you are. Starting out here in the United States, nuclear is not looking good here in the United States. People here know better than anybody that the issue of what to do with spent nuclear fuel is huge, and it's something that this country has not figured out yet. The other thing that's a real downside to nuclear in this country is cost. We haven't built a reactor in this country in several years. There were 2 under construction, and the cost increases were so much that one of them they decided to stop building it. The other one, just yesterday, they came to an agreement to keep going, but it's dicey. And it's because the cost overruns have been extreme. It put Westinghouse into bankruptcy, who was building both of those plants. So I don't see any utility in its right mind choosing to build a nuclear plant in the States right now until perhaps technology changes completely. And we have maybe like modular reactors rather than the stick-built ones that we're doing right now. So I don't see nuclear power in the US going anywhere anytime soon. And it's mostly for economic reasons, really. But other parts of the world are going great guns. The Chinese are building a lot of reactors. The South Koreans are building a lot of reactors. And largely in the developing world, for the most part. We're seeing countries in Europe, Germany turning away from its reactors. France is still going, but France had so many that I don't know how they would turn away from their reactors. So you're seeing different attitudes in different parts of the world. But they're largely based on economics, and the economics in the US are terrible. Sure.
So for us, for a lot of like shale and fracking, that's obviously like much more expensive in order to actually like to get that oil, to get that gas, right? So for countries like Saudi Arabia, that can produce at like $10 a barrel, and we're at like 40 or more, right? It makes our economy a lot more fragile when it comes to any sort of like demand issues. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. That's a terrific question. Where to begin? When I was in Saudi and other places, you would often hear people say the very last barrel of oil ever produced in the world will be produced in Saudi Arabia. And I agree, by and large, because it is so cheap to get oil out of the ground there. How much it actually costs to produce oil there is kind of a state secret, but it's probably less than $10 a barrel. I'd be willing to put a bet on that, this being Vegas. And then, you know, the supply curve goes up from there with various resources at various costs. A little story, when oil prices dropped so much from 2014 to 2016, OPEC didn't respond. Particularly the Saudis said, fine, we're just going to keep on pumping oil. And a lot of people were like, why? I didn't believe this at first, but I've since gone back and talked to people in the region, and I believe it now. They wanted to push the U.S. producers out of business. They thought if they kept prices low enough for long enough that the U.S. industry would just fold up and go home, that they wouldn't be able to produce at those levels, and that they could push that competition out of business. And that didn't work. And the reason why is that they have engineers. I'm an engineer, I can cheer for the engineers. And during times of high oil prices, what the engineers do is they focus on making more oil. During times of low oil prices, they don't take their ball and go home. What they focus on is making oil more cheaply. And so all those engineers kept on working, and the price came down and down and down. So between getting more efficient at producing oil and gas, and also during that time only drilling in the very sweetest of the sweet spots, because those were the spots where they could make money, the industry continued on. A lot of people went out of business during that time. The weaker operators went out of business, but stronger operators bought the assets, and they kept on going. So they thought they were going to push us out of business, and it didn't work. That's one answer to your question. Another more long-term answer to your question is it may be dirt cheap to produce oil in countries like Saudi Arabia, but for the reasons I talked about, the actual price of lifting oil out of the ground is not really their break-even price. You want to think about their break-even price in terms of what I'll call a fiscal break-even price. And that is not what it costs to lift oil out of the ground, but what it costs to balance their government budget. And that price is a lot higher than $10 a barrel. It in Saudi Arabia is on the order of $80 a barrel-ish right now. Other countries are even higher, some are lower. It's quite high in Russia as well, because their economies are built around oil and gas revenue. And so you would think that they would be fine as oil prices dropped, but actually they hurt terribly as oil prices dropped, because their economies are built on counting on these very high oil and gas revenues. So when I talk about the reform, they're doing it not just because they feel like demand is going to drop or they have more competition. Those are both true. But they're also doing it because they feel like in this new world, they need to lower that fiscal break-even cost so they can compete. because even though they're producing oil amazingly cheaply, their real break-even cost is something very different. And so that's a real driver for change. And I was actually in the Middle East the week before last and spent a lot of time talking to people, and they're fully aware of this. They're just trying to figure out how to do it. And I'm actually working with a colleague in Doha on this very question, talking about the economic drivers and the political drivers and how to bring about change in the region. So I could talk about this all day. It's a fun and super interesting topic. So we had other...
There's a lot of headline news about the difficulties in Venezuela. Other than to the Venezuelans, how significant is their oil difficulties there to our hemisphere or anyone else?
That's a great question. I'm going to start out by saying I feel horrendously for the Venezuelans. Talk about messing up a perfectly good economy. What's happened there is heartbreaking. And a reporter asked me yesterday, she said, oil prices are going to go up. Will this help Venezuela? And I had to tell her no, because I think their production is so far gone and they're so sliding down such a steep slope that I don't think rising oil prices today can help them. So I feel horribly for the Venezuelans. I spent time in Colombia this summer, and there's a ton of Venezuelan refugees there because people are leaving the country because they can't afford to live there. But apart from the horrible situation the Venezuelans in, it does affect oil prices globally and particularly in this hemisphere. Not to get too far into the weeds, but refineries on the U.S. Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, that area, are largely set up to run heavy oil. A lot of that oil comes from Venezuela, it comes from Mexico. So as the supply from Venezuela has declined, it's been harder to find oil that's a good fit for those refineries. When I said we export some and import some, that's kind of what I mean. We export stuff that's not a good fit, and we bring in this heavy oil that is a good fit for our refineries. And so that's been hard. It's changed the market for that particular kind of oil that the U.S. is really good at refining. The other thing it is it's part of the general downward trend. You see Iranian oil coming off the market. You see Venezuelan oil declining. A couple other hot spots. Libya has been a little rough lately. And as those geopolitical problems, they're challenging for oil markets. There's oil in the world, and there are people who know how to produce it, but at any given point in time, geopolitical events may be a little challenging, and Venezuela is adding to the challenge right now.
How about Nigeria?
Same. Nigeria is another heartbreaking place. Tremendous oil production, great resources, none of it filters down to the Nigerian people. And so you see a lot of oil theft. You see a lot of environmental damage from oil theft and people running, I can't even call them refineries. They're barely even stills, but they're incredibly polluting. Some really sad things with some poorly managed resources that aren't helping the local people. Sure. Did I see? Okay.
Oh yeah, I think 2 years ago actually UNLV had some photographs from a journalist or an artist who went out to Nigeria and also took photographs of the oil spill.
Yeah, I've seen them. They'll steal oil out of pipelines and refine it. It's a strong word for what they're doing, but into fuel that can be used, and then just everything that doesn't turn into diesel or gasoline just goes into the river. It's heartbreaking. And I mean, a number of things are probably behind it, but an important driver of that is that the local people are not getting the benefits of that resource. It breaks my heart, but there, we'll come back.
You mentioned before you were a strong proponent of the carbon tax. Could you go into a little bit about what you'd like to see with that?
Yeah. So the idea behind, so let's think about a couple of different ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in an economy. You can price carbon. You can put a tax on it, or you can do a cap and trade. And the idea behind that is to let that price look for the cheapest emissions in your economy. You know, if you price it, people will figure out the cheapest way. Another way to go about it is regulation. You can say, this has to be this efficient, and you can't do that, and you have to do that, and you can be very specific about different processes in your economy, and you can put regulations on it. This is a real challenge. You see a lot of regulation. You see a lot of regulation that the Obama administration attempted to do. But what you're seeing now with President Trump demonstrates one problem with doing it through regulation. And that is, President Obama was using the statutes that he had, things like the Clean Air Act, and looking for authorities under those to do things he wanted to do on a regulatory basis, not through Congress doing something new. The challenge with that is that the next administration could undo it. Things you do through executive order, you just have a ton carbon tax, costs $50 a ton. It's very transparent. You know and you know and you know what it costs to emit a ton of carbon. The regulatory approach hides the costs. And the costs aren't necessarily consistent around the different parts of the economy. A fuel efficiency standard might cost this much per ton, more or less. A standard on power plants might cost this much, and they might be really different. And they're also not transparent at all. You can't look at that regulation and go, yeah, that's about $50 a ton. And politicians often like that because they don't necessarily want people to know how much things cost. It's easier to sell if you don't know how much it costs.
Corporations too, right? Corporations too, right?
Well, you know, it's a mixed bag. And I will say, the oil industry is interesting on carbon taxes right now. I will say that quietly, they're like, if we have climate legislation, we could work with that. Whether they come out and do it publicly is fascinating. Read the news about what's going on with the carbon tax that's on the ballot in Washington State. And some companies have come out in favor of it, some are quietly not saying anything. It's fascinating. And they're often, I mean, if a company has to comply, it's often cheaper to deal with a tax and do it exactly, and look for the cheapest way to comply. But politically, it's sometimes easier to regulate because you can't see the costs. And people walking down the street can say, oh, the power company has to comply with that. They're going to pay. So, well, we're the power company. We're all the power company. That comes to us all through our bills. So I understand the politics and the challenges of it, but the economic side of me, if I had my druthers, I like to do it the cheapest way, even though it's politically challenging. So, yeah.
I'll come back to you. I'm sorry. So you mentioned that the relations between Russia and China right now are pretty good when it comes to oil. How do you think that'll change in the future, or do you think it'll stay the same?
It's a good question. I think the balance of power has changed a lot, and not just on energy things, but on other things. Russia likes to think of itself as a global superpower, but it's really not. And China really is. and they're not joking. And so I think the Russians realize this, and it's not just in energy relations. I suspect that they'll get along for a while because they have to. The other thing is you see a lot of the sanctions that the EU and the US and others have put on Russia because of its bad behavior in various places. And the Chinese are just not really into that. It's not their thing. They don't do a lot of sanctions, and they're happy to work around our sanctions, particularly if there's money in it, if there's energy supply in it. And so the Russians see the Chinese as a potential partner, a source of financing, somebody they can work with when others don't want to work with them. And so my gut feeling is that that'll go on for a while just because there's something in it for each of them. They're each getting something that they need and want out of it. So I could see that lasting a while. They may not agree politically on everything, but they might be happy to do business behind the scenes because it makes sense. Back to you. Sorry, I missed you.
There was just a big article on the attempts to overcome methane loss in production. Is that going to be a big thing, or is it just something that somebody happened to get wind of?
Yeah. Okay, where to begin with that? Methane. So methane is the primary component of natural gas. Natural gas, by and large, is methane. And so when you have methane releases from anywhere from at a production well to the pipeline that goes to your house, anywhere, when methane leaks, they're losing their actual product. Methane is also a really strong greenhouse gas. It doesn't last in the atmosphere quite as long as CO2 does, but during the early days, it's almost it's 100 or 50. Anyway, it's orders of magnitude more strong than CO2 is as a greenhouse gas. So it's really important. A little methane makes a big difference. I'm really disappointed in the administration for pulling back on methane regulations. I think it's an absolute no-brainer to minimize methane regulations. It's to minimize methane releases. It's not just about the climate impact. You're also saving product that you can sell. But the thing that's interesting about this one is that the industry's kind of split on it as well. The industry never loves being regulated. They'd always like to do their own thing. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll do the wrong thing. And certain of the large producers have come together and have made announcements, even just in the last week or so, about their own goals to minimize their methane emissions. And I mean, it's somewhat self-serving. Everything's kind of self-serving. I mean, they understand that methane's a serious greenhouse gas and that people care that they do this right. The challenging thing is that some of the smaller operators, some of the operators that have less of a profit margin to play with, it's more of a challenge for them to comply. And the reason why I think you need these regulations, even though some of the larger operators are largely moving in that direction anyway, is that you need a floor. If you can't make money minimizing your methane emissions, then maybe you need to find a new line of business. And so it's not that everyone's going to not comply and this is going to be a total disaster, but it's if you can't do this business right, if you can't look for fugitive emissions and fix them, and using pneumatics in your wells that don't release a lot of methane, like if you can't do these things and profitably, then you really shouldn't be in this business. And so that's my opinion of it. I'm really disappointed. This seemed like a no-brainer, and they got rid of it anyway.
Yeah, so my question has to do with your peak demand comments. And when I look, and I guess I don't fully understand what the issues in your thinking is, because when I look at this, I look at exponential growth of human population and the linked energy needs for that population growth. So why do you predict a peak demand point in the future?
Well, think about the quickest way to say this. When you look at how economies have matured, oil and gas demand has already peaked in many of the OECD economies. You're actually seeing declining demand. You get to a point where it's saturated, and you also see people looking for more energy efficiency. You see technologies changing that are allowing those economies to be more efficient, and you see those economies becoming somewhat more service-oriented and less manufacturing-oriented, and so you see an overall decline in those economies. So what we're looking for is for other countries to follow that path where they peak and then go back down, where they've developed to the degree that they're going to develop and they get better. And interesting, in China's pledge for the Paris Climate Agreement, their primary pledge was based on them peaking their greenhouse gas emissions by a certain date. They still have a less growing population in China particularly, but they still have growing economy, but they want to peak their GHG emissions, and so you're seeing that in other places as well. It's also the reality that we need those to peak. We need those to peak in order to keep global climate change to a level that we can adapt to and deal with. And so when you think about a solution to global climate change, something you have to think about is we think about how we're going to change our lifestyles here. But there are 1 billion people in the world who don't have access to modern energy services. They don't have electricity. They don't. And so any solution has to include them too. And so I hear you talking about growing exponential population growth. But as those populations grow, we in the developed world have to help them develop in ways different than we did. We have to. And you're seeing some leapfrogging. You're seeing in very rural areas people building solar grids with batteries instead of large coal-fired power plants with grids because it's cheaper and it works. And so part of this is a forecast that those technologies will take hold and it will get better. The ones where you're seeing, well, we think demand is going to go out past 2040 versus the ones that peak in the early 2020s, those are those levels of optimism of when this will happen. The early 2020s seems pretty unlikely to me, sadly. But there is this recognition that this needs to happen and that the places where population is growing exponentially need to develop differently than we did, or we're all going to fry. I shouldn't smile at that. That's heartbreaking. But, but it's, I mean, you do what you have to do.
Anybody else? I was thinking, last week we had one of your colleagues out, Jeff Gertz, and he was talking about the challenges that U.S. and other countries have with foreign investment and what governments can and cannot do to foreign investors. So with regards to foreign investment abroad in energy, we know China is doing a lot. Are we doing more than we have been? Are we doing enough? Is it increasing, decreasing?
That's a great question. And when we think of U.S. foreign investment, when I talk about Chinese foreign investment, that is largely government-driven. China has 3 large oil companies, and they're all government-owned, and they all sort of, you know, they are connected to the government. Whereas here in the U.S., when we talk about U.S. foreign investment, it's not government-connected at all. The U.S. will sometimes encourage things. There's the Import-Export Bank. I mean, there are things that we do to encourage investment, but it is not government money, and it's not driven by the government. And so it's really difficult to say what we are doing and what we should be doing when it's this large industry where every company is making its own decisions based on its own, based on its own positions. I will say that the oil and gas world is really interesting right now because it's very divided. You have resources that are controlled by the government in Russia, in many countries actually. They're primarily controlled by government-owned oil companies. Whereas you have the Exxon Mobils and the Shell and Total and Chevron and the oil companies you're all used to hearing about.
Peak demand, and I know that they've been quietly investing in a lot of renewable technologies. What do you think is the end game for those companies? Do they completely take over the renewable space, or is it hard to say?
It's hard to say. I mean, if you look at past transitions, you know, the buggy manufacturers didn't take over car manufacturing. But on the other hand, I think that they have a little more expertise in the energy space. I think they're more similar, and they have more of a head start and more of a heads up that this is coming. It's fascinating. I don't know. I will say that you're seeing the big European oil companies like Shell, Statoil, Total, moving faster in that direction than you see the American companies, but they all see it coming and they're all making decisions in slightly different ways. So they'll sort themselves out, but how is a great question. I don't know.
Thank you, Samantha, for covering so much geographic and energy territory.
No problem. And thank you so much for the hearing.
You're watching Clark County Television, our community, our home, Clark County, Nevada.
This is Nevada Health. Today we are with Jeff Spar, and he is a Vice President of Specialty Business Development at Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, so can you explain to us what integrated population health is?
Sure. Integration population health management is really, it's taking a vast variety of data from a number of different resources and effectively aggregating that information all together. Mm-hmm. Applying analytics, looking at that information to gather insights, and then figuring out how to actually use that information to engage, whether that's with a member or a patient, whether that's for a doctor, really anything in the healthcare system that can ultimately impact and improve somebody's overall health, lower the cost of care, mm-hmm. And then improve the experience for everyone. So it's really that aggregation of data and using it in a way to really improve health outcomes.
Mm-hmm. So how is this for the average person who comes in to see a doctor? How do they see this actually play out?
Yeah, so great question. In some ways, they don't see it, mm-hmm. and it happens behind the scenes, and that's actually okay as well. But, you know, a couple of real examples. So at Anthem, one of the things that we do, and I think a lot of times people don't realize the connection. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we're trying to do is put the eyes and the teeth and mental health back into your body and kind of have this holistic view of somebody's overall health. And so we do that by aggregating all of our products, all of the claims information that comes through those different channels. And so using an example that may or may not be intuitive for vision care as an example, when somebody goes to see their eye care professional, it's the only place on your body where there's an unobstructed view of blood vessels. And so a lot of conditions that impact your circulatory system, most people think, well, I'm just going there because I need a new prescription.
Right.
The reality is they can see things that may impact, so diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, even some types of tumors.
Wow.
Again, things that can manifest themselves through the circulatory system. It's a great early indicator. For us, we partner with eye care professionals to actually get that data back because that's really valuable. The industry in general has really grown up really fragmented and disconnected. So a lot of times that data doesn't go anywhere. For Anthem, what we can do is we can use that. It becomes part of somebody's healthcare record. For example, if they see indications of diabetes, we have tools that then we can do outreach to that member to say, how can we support you on your journey to take care of diabetes? Another example, that's kind of getting information from an eye care professional. The other thing that we did is basic as this is, we really asked providers or eye care professionals, how can we help you deliver better care for our members? And the number one thing they came back with was, how can you help us better understand the health conditions of the person walking into our office? And, for us, we've got a large medical book of business as well. That's something that's pretty easy for us to do. And so what we do is, it's kind of grown up, and we joke around, but it's called the big orange button. And so literally eye care professional offices, when they go and look up benefits and eligibility, they click that button and they're getting diagnosis information, prescription drug information, lab results that may have an impact on your eyesight. And why people don't necessarily understand the connection or why this is important is that, when we went back and looked, 22 out of the top 25 most commonly prescribed drugs can have an impact on your vision.
Oh, really? Wow.
So light sensitivity, blurry vision, double vision. And so the reason that somebody may be presenting into that eye care professional's office could be because of the medication they're taking. And unless, with us sharing that information, it's not something that people intuitively think about.
Right.
Or they may have filled out, I always joke around whenever I go to a new doctor's office, there's the sheet of paper that's been photocopied for 7 years. It's a little crooked. But I don't keep that up to date necessarily, and I don't always think, because I don't even make the connection that, the pill I'm putting in my mouth could be impacting my eyesight. So, there's examples across a lot of products. Some of those things, may have a real visible patient impact, and some things may happen and they actually don't know they're happening behind the scenes.
And I think it's interesting because, I think you could argue most people are a little more comfortable going into thinking they're getting a new pair of glasses than going in for an annual checkup or to see a doctor, because that can be a little scarier for most people.
Right.
So is that something you guys are consciously leveraging with this program?
Yeah, I think for us, the beauty is, you think about all the interactions you have in this broader healthcare arena. I think, again, just the industry's historically been so fragmented that we think of this concept of medical, and we kind of discount these other interactions that occur. But the reality is we know, people on average, they're going to see their dentist 1.6 times a year. 40% of our population will go see their eye care professional in a year. And so, if we don't take advantage of those opportunities, we're kind of missing out on the bigger piece of what's going on with that individual. And it's actually a really good opportunity as we continue to partner with doctors, dentists, eye care professionals. They're a really trusted resource. They can actually help communicate back to members. And as they start to become more, we really want kind of an integrated health team in partnership with providers. They can help influence behavior to ultimately get better health outcomes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way this would work is, let's say I go in for an eye appointment and they see something in my eyes that indicates, I'm at risk for diabetes.
Sure.
It gets put into a system
Yep.
that's sent to you guys, and you guys then contact the patient, or
so a few different things. So we get we get more than 1 billion claims a year on our population of members, spanning all products. And when you include medical, pharmacy, dental, vision, behavioral health. So all of that data basically gets aggregated, and then we basically run analytics daily, weekly, monthly, and against evidence-based guidelines. And so we're looking for things, for example, in this case, if it was a newly identified diabetic, then that can be a trigger into our care management program. And so we can have nurses that would reach out to that individual. We would note that for the primary care physician, because again, they may or may not be aware,
right?
Because they may not have seen their primary care physician in years. And then we'll also monitor to make sure, now that they're an identified diabetic, are they getting regular eye care, as an example, or dental care? Because again, the connection holistically, again, people don't always understand, but there's a lot of connections that those things really, if you can manage the whole, you'll get a better health outcome.
And I imagine, so it's advantageous in a couple ways, because you're catching these things early, which means the patient's going to be better off. But then also for you guys, you can treat it in a way that's just generally less costly, I would imagine.
Yeah, for us, it goes back to, the more preventive care you can do, the more you can catch conditions early, the more you have an opportunity to hedge those things before they become even more critical.
Do you guys try to incentivize that preventative care, and how does that work?
Yeah, we do. So we have a number of different programs. A lot of times we're selling plans through an employer. So we'll work collaboratively with an employer to figure out what are their objectives for their population, for their employee population. And, we have incentive programs based on what they're trying to achieve. So some folks may be trying to motivate or incent flu shots, as an example, or smoking cessation. Those are some of the more popular programs.
Right.
And so, we'll support them in that with programs.
That all makes sense. Which doctors are most likely to catch conditions early? So you mentioned optometrists, but who else do people tend to see that might be able to catch some things?
Yeah, so interesting. So, we see really good information coming from optometrists. What I don't want to mislead is we've taken some really good steps, but I still feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg. And so I think even with optometrists or ophthalmologists, as an example, we can get even more data as they start to understand, because historically they've not all, some of them have thought, I'm in the business for checking 20/20 vision and dispensing glasses or contacts. So I think as we continue that partnership, we'll get even more information from optometrists. Disability claims, as we get disability claims in, that's another good source for identifying and being able to engage somebody early. So just as an example, somebody who's pregnant and maybe they go out because they have to go out on bed rest. So if they're working, we're going to get a disability claim because they want their income reimbursement. But from a health perspective, on the medical side, we may not even know that person is pregnant yet because they haven't delivered a baby. And so for us, we can see the disability claim come in. We can identify, wait a minute, this is an early, somebody who's going out early. We can get them into what we call our Future Moms program. So we can effectively refer, and they do a great job working with folks that have higher risk pregnancies and engaging with members. So it's just another example where we can, by getting that intervention, we can get a better outcome for the patient, the member.
One thing we were talking about before the show is a lot of times people sort of don't trust the insurance providers, but you guys, we kind of talked about how there's incentive for you guys to help people. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So from our perspective, our long-term incentives are aligned. We want folks to be healthier. Folks that are healthier, they're more productive, and they have lower long-term healthcare costs. And so I think from that perspective, we certainly have aligned objectives. But we also recognize as an industry that the insurance company may not be the most trusted advisor. People tend to view their doctor as that's a trusted advisor. And the reality is we work every single day. That's why we're in business, to earn that trust, and to present and make sure that we're offering products, services that ultimately people value. And we're seeing that movement up because, again, we have long-term aligned incentives.
When did this idea of integration begin?
It's something. So I've been, I guess I would, what we call specialty, so dental, vision, life, and disability. I've been in that line of our business for about 13 years.
Oh, wow.
And I will say probably, 8 to 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk, people recognizing that your eyes and your teeth and they do impact your overall health, and we should be looking at it holistically. So there was a lot of chatter from an industry perspective, but when you looked around and said, that makes sense, what are people actually doing about it? The way the industry's grown up is you've got companies that have single line products. So they might do dental insurance only, or they might do vision insurance. And, from our perspective, we want to do that, but we're a healthcare company. And so we want to make those connections. I'd say probably in the last 5 or 6 years, we've made the transition from interesting concept to what are we going to do about it? How can we contribute to progress? And this might seem silly. I'm so excited about healthcare. I never would have thought I would say that, but if I think about the next 18 months, the next 24 months, the next 3-year horizon, the reality is technology, data, and our ability as an industry to apply that to truly drive behavior change and get better health outcomes. To me, it's, we're pretty darn close to a pretty step change to just the way that we've operated. To what we can ultimately do in the industry.
Yeah, it's almost like how we've watched our cell phones progress, where we used to have like 10 years ago these big bricks, and now it's like this little supercomputer.
Yeah, I mean, so this came out roughly 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And at the time when people asked, do you need a device that's your, people had MP3 players and, Garmin navigation and cameras and their address book and all of those things. And when people asked, hey, how would you like a device? People actually didn't really even know how to react. So I don't know if I need that because I've never had it before.
Right.
And, the reality is, fast forward 10 years, I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but when you leave your house and you start doing the check, wait a minute, where's my phone? And that emotional connection, and and then I start negotiating with myself, well, wait, I'm going to be away for 20 minutes. Can I survive for 20 minutes, or do I need to turn around? So it went from a device that we didn't know we needed to something it's just part of our life now.
Yeah.
And I think healthcare, from a lot of ways, if I think about the evolution, it just took basic things that we use every day and packaged them together. And then, and that's what we're trying to do with integration. Take products and services that people are already using and package them together. And then, as this has evolved, it's the way that it uses data. So now when I take a picture, it knows where I was and tags everything, and address book, I can click somebody's name and it'll map me automatically to where they're at and tell me how long it's going to take. I mean, that's to me the evolution that we're on from a healthcare perspective, being able to take data from a lot of different sources, apply technology, and start to do really cool things, some of which we can't even imagine probably at the moment.
So speaking of smartphones, how are you trying to reach out to patients or get in touch with them via smartphone? Because you had mentioned that before you would send letters or make phone calls, but that a lot of times that's easy to ignore.
Right. Yeah. Just again, as an industry, the way that we would communicate was phone call and mail, and I'm sure. I'm a data point of one, but I suspect others are like this too. I mean, people just don't pay attention to mail. People are busy, and even having a home phone these days, not everybody has a home phone. So, to me, part of that step change that we're encountering from a healthcare perspective is everyone, for the most part, has one of these devices.
Yeah.
And once, as we start to communicate in a much richer way with folks on a two-way basis, again, this will be one of the things that helps drive behavior change. So as we look at this, we think this is a critical part of how we communicate with members going forward. And so we've got a lot of investment in tools like this and just that rich dialogue with members, rather than just, a mailer that may go out, 2 months after, an event that may have triggered that mailer in the first place.
Right. How could you see the smartphone being important in, say, 5 or 10 years? Like, where do you see that going? How important that is for healthcare and what you guys do?
Like I said, I think from a communication vehicle, from and this is obviously with member opting in and seeing the value, but being able to track. I mean, you think about some of the the Fitbit trackers and things like that. it starts to give you real-time feedback on where you're at in your journey.
Right.
And I think a lot of times, to get true behavior change, somebody has to be listening. They have to be capable of understanding where am I realistically from a healthcare perspective, because sometimes people don't. They may think they're doing better than they really are.
Right.
They have to be open to want to change,
Mm-hmm.
and then they have to understand what tools are there to support them. And so I think, again, our ability to connect with a member, understand where they're at in that journey, and then provide them tools, it's a great tool for us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like if a doctor asks you, are you active? You probably say, yeah, I think I'm active. But if you
Right.
have that number on your cell phone that says you walk, 2,000 steps a day, you go, yeah, I don't know if our definitions of
Right.
activity are the same.
My typical annual physical experience.
Yeah.
So I go in there and we have the same dialogue every year. So I'm a little bit older, a little bit heavier. My cholesterol's gone up a little bit more.
Right.
And the feedback is watch your diet and exercise more. And,
Right.
we have this kind of awkward, uncomfortable silence for about 5 seconds afterwards, and I say, yes, I'll do that. And then we go on. But this will be a much richer medium to track and understand. And again, most importantly, provide tools to help somebody on that journey that want to make a change.
Yeah, and I think it can almost, not only is it a reminder when it's on your wrist or in your pocket all the time, but it's also, there's some incentive. It's almost like you can gamify these things and driving people to,
absolutely.
If you're supposed to get 10,000 steps a day and you see you only have 7, you might be like, yeah, let's take the dog for a walk or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to me, that's how all these things start to come together is really, that's what gets me excited about healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Is the industry as a whole starting to adopt this idea of integration, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think just, by nature, certain companies are probably positioned a little different just because, I think for Anthem, we tend to manage the whole because we're offering medical, dental, vision. We have a broad portfolio. So I think certain companies are probably better positioned, but I think everybody recognizes, clearly everybody, there's a lot of research out there that shows the correlation. A product that we haven't really talked about, but is dental.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, what I would have known about dental 10 years ago is I need to go every 6 months
right
to the dentist and
get my teeth cleaned.
Get my teeth cleaned and do the little dance about did you floss or not.
Yeah. Question if you're going to lie or not.
Right. But I think what, a lot of the research and what we're finding today, and not to get too graphic, but at the end of the day, if you're not taking care of your mouth, you effectively have bacteria and inflammation.
Right.
And this is where as an industry, we've not done a service to this holistic thinking and it doesn't just stay in your mouth. Our body's a system, just like the healthcare system.
Right.
And so if you're diabetic, if you have any other chronic condition and you're fighting infection that doesn't stay just in your mouth, you're complicating everything. And so it just gives us the opportunity, again, when we identify high risk individuals, it seems silly because people don't always make the connection, but we will start monitoring, are they getting their teeth cleaned on a regular basis? And if they're not, we will start messaging to them. And again, it's little things like that, again, I don't know that there's any one silver bullet, but when everything kind of works in harmony, and everybody's getting kind of a consistent message from a lot of different fronts, that's the best scenario to drive change.
Yeah, you mentioned an interesting word, silver bullet. It's like everyone with their health kind of wants to do just one thing that's going to fix all their problems. Maybe it's like a certain diet or a workout or whatever, some pill, but it really is like, biology is very complex and it's a lot of little things is what you see works. So how do you guys measure the success of this program?
Yeah, so good question. And this is where, again, I would be very transparent. I think this is a long-term journey that we're on. And so some of the things that we look at now, we look at activity. So as an example, we've identified 24,000 diabetics through eye exams last year. So we're looking at it from an activity perspective, or we've monitored and engaged X number of individuals that are not getting regular dental cleanings. Where we want to take it long term and where we think has the most value is looking at that over a period of time. Can you demonstrate that, there's evidence out there in the industry that would say if you identify a diabetic and you manage them early, it'll save you $10,000. That's great, we believe it directionally.
Yeah.
But long term, we'd like to do our own studies that help reinforce, and so we can also go in and talk to employers and say, hey, here's 5 things you can do, and here's what we would expect that to be. How more productive your employees will be, because that's really important.
Right.
And then ultimately, from a healthcare perspective, how much we can save them.
Right. And those chronic conditions that many of them tend to be preventable, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Save you guys a lot of money, save the customer a lot of money, and then also just, they're in better health.
Right. Absolutely.
Live longer and feel better. So how much extra does this program cost a patient?
One of those questions I get all the time. And they usually ask it from an ROI perspective. What's the return on investment? So a few things. One is, I go back to, we're a healthcare company.
Yep.
And so for us not to use data we already have to do good, I mean, to me, that is what we do. And so we've made the investments to do that. There's no separate, what we call Anthem Whole Health Connection, which is how we connect all the dots. We don't charge for that. That's just part of the products and services we provide. A lot of times we get asked about the ROI question and, hey, what's the return on investment? And I kind of go back to the same thing and just say, I'm pretty good at math, but I can't calculate a return when we don't actually charge. There is no investment we're asking you to make here. So, but yeah, I mean, we just view that, again, as a healthcare organization, our mission is to make sure that we have healthy members. And to move in that direction. So it's just part of who we are and what we do.
What's been the response of your members to the program, specifically maybe older ones that haven't sort of seen this type of thinking?
I'll use one example. So we had a mother who took her child into the eye care professional, and he actually had a lot of issues early on. He'd actually had heart surgery, and he was on probably, I want to say 6 to 7 different medications. And during the course of the exam, the eye care professional noticed that he had a lot of pressure in his eye, which can cause damage long term.
Right.
And so he was able to look up what prescriptions, because the mother. Really good, but again, there's just so many different medications, and knowing what are they on and what's the dosage. The eye care professional can actually look at that, identify, hey, this is, this particular drug is probably impacting, actually called the primary care physician and some of the other healthcare providers and said, hey, is there an alternative? And so that was a thrilled member. I mean, we've got a testimonial from her, and again, it was just, it was a pleasant surprise.
Yep.
That's an example of where how the healthcare system should work.
Right.
That we actually share data and talk to each other to improve health. And so, I think it's been very positive.
It kind of seems like there's just going to be this march over time where you have younger doctors that are more data savvy, and it's just kind of like technology advances.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you think about population health management and big data, there is a massive opportunity in healthcare to do something that really matters, to do things that are kind of unimaginable today. Just to give you, this is just my view, but we take a lot of what I would call structured data. So we have claims data, but if you look at all of the other things that go into somebody's health or can be an indicator of somebody's health, there's a lot of unstructured data out there.
Right.
And, I think over time, being able to incorporate all of that together, to me, there's a fascinating data science, population, big data kind of concept. That, if there's anybody who's interested getting into that profession, healthcare is a great one, because you can actually do something that really matters.
Yeah.
And it will change the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is interesting because you see some of those companies that maybe we can consider a little, quote unquote, sexier, like Apple sort of getting into tracking health with the study they've started. And, you might see companies like even Tesla or someone start getting into like health products. And
and I think kind of the marriage of the unstructured data and then the structured data, and what, because of Anthem and our size and our breadth of product, we see a lot of interactions in the healthcare system. And just because healthcare is so fragmented, and I tend to travel a lot for my role, and I may be traveling and I've got to go to an urgent care facility and pick your state. Again, that's not that data, my primary care physician probably has no idea. Nobody kind of connects the dots, and I think that's we're in a great position to do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How else have you seen healthcare change in the time that you've been in the industry?
I think, I guess I would say 10 years ago it was about the benefits, meaning it was about what's the product design of a medical product or a dental product, and what's the network, and those things are all really important. Mm-hmm. But I think what we're seeing is the benefits are important, but it's also how the pieces come together, and how do we connect back to a member. How do we connect the data on the back end? To me, that's been the biggest change. It's just this philosophy in an industry that's been completely fragmented, and viewing that, hey, we're in the insurance business, and really that transition from insurance to population health management, actually moving towards getting better health.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, for the average person, what sort of things do you think they're leaving on the table when it comes to health insurance? Like, what are the biggest things that you see people just don't use that are really cool?
I would say, I guess really cool is a relative word. I guess I do think, I don't think people realize, and again, to me, the journey that we're on is the right one. Yeah. So I'm not claiming success or victory by any sense of the imagination, but I do think kind of the mobile tools that some of the larger players are introducing, to me, there's probably resources there that people don't, fully realize are there. And I think over time, I use a great example. Hey, if I'm traveling and